The music faded. The guests turned silent. Under the soft glow of 1,000 hanging lights, David Whittaker held the microphone with shaking hands. His tuxedo was flawless, but his voice cracked. "Before we say I do, there's something I need to confess." Isabel froze at the altar, bouquet trembling. No one moved. No one breathed. And in that suspended moment, the fairy tale began to unravel, word by word. Just moments earlier, everything had looked perfect. Rows of white roses framed the aisle. A string quartet played softly. The Monroe family beamed with pride, and David had smiled too, until now. Because behind that smile was a truth he couldn't carry anymore. For months, he'd been hiding the collapse of his company, the lawsuits, the debt, the shame. He could have gone through with the ceremony, said the vows, and kept pretending. But when he saw Isabel walking toward him, full of love and certainty, something inside him shattered. This couldn't be built on a lie. He was about to risk everything, not just his pride, but the one person who had ever seen beyond it. This is the story of how David faced his greatest failure, and how love, when stripped of everything else, revealed what truly remained. But at that moment, he had no idea what was coming. David Whittaker never felt like he belonged in the rooms he walked into. Raised in a small apartment above a laundromat in Columbus, Ohio, he was the son of a school janitor and a long-haul truck driver. He learned early that the world didn't hand you anything. So he took everything he could, with charm, brilliance, and a hunger that never let him rest. By 32, he had built Crossline, a logistics tech startup that went from a garage idea to a multi-million-dollar venture. He became the keynote speaker at innovation summits, the face of underdog success stories. His photo graced magazine covers. And yet, in the quiet moments when the crowd was gone and the suit came off, David often stared into the dark, wondering if he had simply fooled them all. He met Isabel Monroe at a charity gala he almost didn't attend. She wasn't impressed by his resume, nor his car. She asked him about the last book he read. She challenged his opinions. She didn't care that he wasn't old money. She cared about who he was when no one was looking. That terrified him and saved him. Their relationship moved fast. Isabel, despite her parents' subtle disapproval, leaned fully into it. Her father, Senator Thomas Monroe, believed in legacy, structure, and marrying someone within your tier. David was the opposite of that, but Isabel believed in building something new, not inheriting something old. At first, that belief held them together. They planned a life where her elegance and his fire could coexist. But as their wedding date approached, David began to lose grip on the very thing that defined him: control. Crossline had expanded too fast. A key partnership overseas crumbled. A quiet investigation turned into a public scandal. Investors panicked. Then clients vanished. He told no one, not even Isabel. He smiled at every brunch, held her hand at every tasting, and kept every promise except the one that mattered most: honesty. He convinced himself it was temporary, that he'd fix it before she ever found out. But the closer they got to the altar, the heavier the silence inside him became, and that's when things truly began to fall apart. David had always believed that if he built something powerful enough, he could outrun where he came from. He dreamed of a life where his kids would never know what it meant to choose between electricity and groceries. A house near the coast, mornings with coffee and quiet, nights with books and peace. And Isabel, she became the heart of that dream. She made things soft, real. When she talked about wanting to open a literacy program for underprivileged kids, he saw more than a project. He saw a life they could build, one that mattered. When he proposed to her at a secluded vineyard in Sonoma, under strings of lights and a sky full of stars, she didn't hesitate. He had never been so sure of anything. But just as quickly as things had come together, they started to crack. It began with a single call. One of Crossline's senior partners, someone David had trusted like a brother, was under investigation for fraud. At first, it was distant noise. He wasn't directly involved. But then the media began to dig deeper. Whispers turned into headlines. Investors started pulling out, quietly but decisively. Clients began to reconsider contracts. The company's cash flow shrank fast. David scrambled. He liquidated small assets, took bridge loans, even dipped into his personal savings. He told Isabel it was a growth adjustment, just a temporary shift before the next big leap. She believed him. She always did. But the pressure kept building. A lawsuit arrived in the mail. Then another. By the time he realized how deep the hole was, he was too proud and too scared to ask for help. Crossline's office, once buzzing with ambition, grew quieter each week. First, he let go of the interns, then the marketing team. Eventually, he sold the downtown office space and moved operations to a shared co-working floor. And still, he said nothing. Every time Isabel asked how things were going, he kissed her forehead and said, "We're almost there." But the truth was, he was drowning. He kept planning the wedding like everything was fine, choosing flowers, finalizing the guest list, smiling for photos. But inside, it felt like he was painting a house on fire. And he still believed somehow that he could fix it, that one more pitch, one more call, one more miracle would save everything. What he didn't realize was that the first thing to collapse wouldn't be the company. It would be his silence. 3 days before the wedding, David received the final blow. A bridge loan he'd been depending on was denied. Without it, payroll would bounce. Bills, some already overdue, would default. His personal accounts were nearly empty. The suit he wore to meetings had been bought on credit he couldn't repay. He sat alone in his condo, lights off, bottle of whiskey untouched on the counter. For the first time in his life, David Whittaker had no moves left. The silence roared. His phone buzzed. Isabel, a photo of the seating chart, a heart emoji. He stared at it, unable to respond. She was preparing for the happiest day of their lives, and he was preparing to watch it burn. He thought about disappearing, driving west with no destination, letting the shame swallow him quietly, but then he imagined Isabel standing at that altar, waiting, and the image crushed him. She deserved more than a vanishing act. She deserved the truth. But truth, in his world, had never come without consequences. When his mother passed away from a preventable illness because they couldn't afford the best treatment, David vowed never to be powerless again. That vow became a fortress, one he built with deals and charm and strategy. Now that fortress was crumbling, and all that was left behind it was him, raw, flawed, broke. He didn't sleep that night. The morning of the wedding, he moved like a man in a dream, shaved, dressed, nodded when people spoke to him. But the moment he saw Isabel, radiant, calm, walking toward him with absolute faith, his chest tightened. He couldn't do it. Not to her, not to them. The ceremony began, the music rose, the officiant smiled, but David's mind was miles away, spiraling through everything he hadn't said. Then it happened. She reached him, took his hand, and his heart cracked open. "Before we say 'I do,'" he said, voice breaking, "there's something I need to confess." Gasps spread like wildfire through the room. He turned to face Isabel, his hands trembling. His voice shook, but he didn't stop. "I lost the company, the money, everything. I've been hiding it. From you, from everyone. I was scared of failing, of being nothing again. But most of all, I was scared of losing you." Silent. Not the awkward kind, the heavy kind. Isabel didn't speak. Her hand slowly lowered, bouquet brushing the floor. Her lips parted, but no words came. In the front row, Senator Monroe's jaw clenched. Margaret whispered something inaudible, already reaching for her purse. David didn't look at them. He looked only at Isabel. "I couldn't lie to you. Not today. Not anymore." The silence deepened. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. A few stood. One couple left, And still Isabel said nothing. David's chest felt hollow, empty in a way no failure had ever made him feel. He expected her to walk away, to turn her back and vanish into the blur of silk and whispers, but she didn't move. She just stood there, torn between heartbreak and something else, something still forming in her eyes. Eventually the ceremony was called off. The guests began to file out. The music died. David stood alone in the center of a ballroom that had been decorated like a dream, and now felt like a stage abandoned mid-performance. He didn't know what would happen next. He only knew one thing. For the first time in years, he had told the truth, and now he had nothing left to lose. And you? Have you ever stood at a crossroads where telling the truth meant risking everything? Sometimes the hardest words are the ones that finally set us free. Share your story in the comments, because someone out there might be carrying the same fear, waiting to know they're not alone. Your honesty could be the light someone else has been searching for. The suite was silent. Isabel sat in her wedding dress, the lace sleeves limp at her sides, the bouquet abandoned on the floor. Her reflection stared back from the vanity, perfect makeup now smudged, eyes hollow with shock. She had played this moment in her mind 1,000 times since she was a little girl, but never like this. Never with heartbreak before vows. Never with truth so raw it burned. Her parents were furious, her friends texted non-stop, the world wanted a reaction, but inside, Isabel was still trying to feel what she actually felt. She thought about David, not as the public figure, not as the man who proposed with violinists and candlelight, but as the guy who once took her to a used bookstore and spent 2 hours talking about the poetry of Rainer Maria Rilke. She remembered the nights they stayed up dreaming about who they wanted to become. Not rich, not powerful, just whole. That man she loved wasn't gone. He was the one who stood trembling at the altar and told the truth when it would have been easier to lie. And she froze, not because she didn't care, but because caring hurt too much. In the mirror, she no longer saw a broken bride. She saw a woman with a choice, to walk away and protect her image, or to stay and protect what was real. It wasn't an answer yet. It wasn't clarity, but it was a beginning. Isabel stood slowly, the dress heavy, but her steps lighter than they'd been in days. Outside, the world would still be loud, but inside her, something had gone quiet, still, focused. She didn't know what came next, but for the first time, she wanted to find out. They didn't run away. They didn't make a grand statement on social media or hold a press conference. 2 days after the wedding that never happened, David and Isabel packed 2 duffel bags and left the city without a plan, just a direction. South. They found a small cabin in North Carolina, nestled between pine trees and gravel roads. No internet, no doorbell cameras, no expectations. For the first time in years, the silence was comforting, not crushing. Mornings were slow. Coffee boiled on the stove. David fixed things around the cabin just to feel useful. Isabel read on the porch, wrapped in oversized sweaters, her hair tied up, her phone turned off. They didn't talk much, at first. Then slowly, the words returned. They talked about shame, about fear, about how David had always believed love had to be earned through success, and how Isabel had mistaken his silence for strength. At night, they made pasta in a single pot and laughed at how uneventful life had become. It wasn't romantic, not in the movie sense. It was raw, quiet, honest, and it was theirs. David started journaling again, something he hadn't done since college. Isabel began sketching designs for a literacy program she'd shelved years ago. They weren't fixing their lives, not yet, but they were finally showing up for them. But healing isn't linear. Reality found them, even in the woods. The headlines resurfaced. Tech golden boy burns out. Former investors threatened legal action. A journalist left messages on David's voicemail. Isabel's parents went silent until her mother sent a single message. Call us when you're thinking clearly. One morning, David stared at a near-empty bank account. His fingers hovered over a funding app. Emergency loan. Quick turnaround. High risk. Isabel closed the laptop before he could click. "No shortcuts," she said. "Not again." He nodded, but his hands were shaking. That night, they fought. Not screaming, but the kind that cuts deeper, about responsibility, about hope, about whether love was enough when everything else had fallen apart. Isabel asked, "What if we never get back what we had?" David replied, "What if what we had was never real?" They sat in silence. But the next morning, she found him sweeping the porch, and he found her writing, pen to paper finally. Small things, but they mattered. Later that week, Isabel submitted a short essay to a small online magazine. It was published within days. When she saw her name under the headline, she cried. Not because it was huge, but because it was hers. David got a call from a local college asking if he'd speak at an entrepreneurship panel. "They want to hear about what went wrong," he said. "Then tell them," Isabel whispered. "They don't need your perfection. They need your truth." He hesitated, but he said yes. It wasn't redemption. Not yet. But it was a seed. And that was enough, for now. It came with a knock on the cabin door. A delivery guy, suit and clipboard, asking for David Whitaker. A letter, no return address. David opened it on the porch. Inside, a formal invitation. Senator Monroe wanted to meet. Isabel froze. "You don't have to go," she said. David nodded. "I know, but I think I should." 2 days later, he sat across from the senator in a penthouse office overlooking the city skyline. Marble floors, bookshelves untouched. Power radiated from every corner. Thomas Monroe didn't offer water, didn't fake small talk. "I've been watching," he said. "You've adjusted." David kept still. "I've spoken with contacts. There's capital, a clean company ready for a new leader. You could rebuild faster than you think." David waited. "There's one condition," Monroe added, eyes hard. "You end it, with Isabel. Publicly, respectfully. Let her come home, resume her path. She's not built for poverty, David. You know that." Silence. The kind that tastes like metal in your mouth. David leaned back in the chair, heart pounding. This was everything he once dreamed of. Power, access, restoration. All it would cost was the one person who stood beside him when everyone else vanished. He saw her face, the porch light in her eyes when she got that first essay published. The way she closed the laptop before he fell into the same cycle. He stood up. "No," he said. Monroe blinked. "I won't trade her for a shortcut. Not again." "You're walking away from your future," David smiled. A slow, tired smile. "No, sir. I'm walking toward it." He left without shaking hands. Back at the cabin, Isabel sat on the front steps, blanket around her shoulders. She looked up, hesitant. "Well?" she asked. David knelt in front of her, took her hands. "He offered everything I thought I wanted, but it came with a price I'm done paying." "What price?" "You." She didn't answer. She just leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, eyes closed. Not in celebration, in quiet, trembling relief. That night, under a sky freckled with stars, they sat wrapped in old quilts, not saying much, but they didn't need to. Something had shifted, not around them, but within them. They weren't chasing a future anymore. They were living it. Years passed, but the world never quite remembered the scandal. Headlines faded. Podcasts moved on. Algorithms forgot. But David and Isabel hadn't forgotten what it felt like to lose everything and still have each other. They eventually moved into a small home in Asheville, a fixer-upper with creaky floors and a garden Isabel loved more than any penthouse view. No staff, no investors, just late mornings and real meals and laughter that didn't have to impress anyone. David started a podcast called After the Fall. He interviewed people not about success, but about what came after failure. The pain, the rebuild, the truth. It didn't go viral, but it mattered. Isabel published her first children's book. It was about a girl who planted seeds in broken soil, never knowing if they'd grow. It found its way into libraries, into classrooms, into quiet hands that needed it. They didn't rebuild their empire. They built something better, A life that wasn't curated or filtered or monetized. It was real, quietly brave, rooted in honesty. David once thought falling meant you'd failed. Now, he saw it differently. Sometimes the ground gives out beneath you, so you can finally build on something that lasts. Maybe you've been there too, standing in the wreckage of what you built, wondering if anything is worth saving. Maybe you've been the one holding someone's hand as everything falls apart. Or maybe you're just now realizing that love isn't proven in perfect moments, but in the ones when everything breaks. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about the moment you chose truth over image, love over fear. Your story might be the reminder someone else is waiting for. And if you believe in second chances, real ones, the kind that grow from silence and scars, leave a like. It helps more people find stories like this, and subscribe for more. Because the next one might be the story you didn't know you needed to hear.